Let's start with the other fellow then. So tell me a bit about this, Stuart.
Okay, so this is it sounds like a really weird film, but stick with me. It's a documentary about a group of very different men from like across the world who are all united by the fact that they have the name James Bond.
Right. Okay.
Um,
Go on.
and I was genuinely surprised with this. I'm a Bond fan, so it had been on my radar for a little while, but I thought it was going to be kind of a fluffy sort of. Wouldn't it great to be called James Bond and the funny little anecdotes that come with, telling people your name's James Bond? But it's so much more than that. It's got some real depth to it. I was genuinely surprised by it. It's a nice, short, little brisk film. I don't want to say too much about the stories, but it deals with things like loss, fear, survival, discovery. There's one story about how like being called James Bond genuinely saved somebody's life, um, and things like that. And it's also interesting seeing how people with different skin color are treated by being called James Bond. There's a story of a white man being pulled over by a police officer and a black man being pulled over by a police officer, and the difference in how they're treated when they tell them that their name is James Bond. Because
Wow.
you think if you pull somebody over and they tell you their name's James Bond, the officer
Mm.
automatically assumes that they're taking the mick.
Mm.
And it's just really interesting. Like I say, there's so much more depth to it than I was expecting. I was expecting just this really light, fluffy thing, but
Mm.
it's so much, and it's wonderfully put together. The perfectly paced. It's genuinely compelling. Some of the stories as well.
Do you think, Stuart, that when the producers of the film made it, they were expecting the same thing? They thought, oh, we'll get all these people and it'll be really fun. And actually, it kind of, in a similar way to your podcast, maybe took a slightly different turn, and they've discovered all of these incredible stories.
Yeah, I think it possibly is. Again, I'd love to hear them talk more about it. I've seen
Mm.
little interview clips of them and that, but it's genuinely fascinating. Like I say, and it's because there's people who were called James Bond before the films came out. There's a family in it that the name James Bond is passed down from father to son. So, and it's the blessings and the curses that come with that. And they even look at the original, for want of a better term, James Bond, who was the author of Birds of the West Indies, who that's the book Ian Fleming had that he picked the name
Right.
from. And obviously, once that got out, that had an effect on his life as well. And they explore that as well through reconstructions and all that sort of thing. And it's
Mm.
just, like I say, it's a really well put together. It's really fascinating. It's a lot more compelling than it might appear to be just from the sort of synopsis.
Mm.
Um, and there are people that embrace the being called James Bond and try and live that James Bond lifestyle, minus the, you know, assassinating people aspect of being James Bond. And there are those that shy away from it. And there's a particularly funny bit with one guy who shies away from it, but if somebody's willing to pay him, he'll happily be James Bond for him,
Right. That's brilliant.
and lean into it.
Mm.
It's like I say, it's one of those things. It always sounds kind of cool to be like, I wish I had a name like James Bond or Jason Bourne or something like that. But then when you actually think about the pitfalls that come with it,
Mm.
it's sort of that double-edged sword. But yeah, it's just a really fascinating thing. It's available to rent or buy digitally at the moment. I think it had a limited cinema release here, but at the moment that's the only way you can see it. But it's definitely worth checking out, especially if you're a Bond fan.
Mm. Fantastic. All right. Well, yeah, that's good to know then. So you can get it on your sort of your digital services.